Hello and welcome to Slide 5. All right, let's talk about the acting companies of the English Renaissance. There were two types of professional companies during the end of the 1500s and the first half of the 1600s. There were adult companies and boys' companies. Both types of these companies sought to focus their activities in London, of course, because that's where all the opportunities were to perform. And the best companies eventually resided in London and, took up residence at one of the playhouses. Of the many adult companies of the day, the Queen's men, the Admiral's men, and the Chamberlain's men were the most influential. Those were the big three. So let's talk about them a little bit. In 1583, the Queen's men was established as an acting troupe because the Queen ordered the Master of Revels. There was this court-appointed position called the Master of Revels, and he was in charge of all things theater, which sounds kind of cool. And he was ordered by the Queen in 1583 to form an all-star company to perform for the Queen and to give that company a monopoly on playing within London. So they got to be formed of all these all-stars, and they were given like just instant access to performance, and they were just sort of they dominated the theater scene, of course, because they were basically like owned by the Queen, and she could do that kind of stuff. The Queen's men started the trend of having very large casts, and they really did raise the standards of acting in England because they were formed of all these all-star actors, and they were just really, really good. Eventually, the Queen's Men theater troupe failed eventually because certain members died, and then there was a lot of like infighting among the remaining members. So it sort of, faded out. And then in its place, two other theater companies sort of got formed, and they saw an opportunity to become like the best theater troupe in London, and these were called the Admiral's Men and the Chamberlain's Men. The Chamberlain's Men is the one that William Shakespeare was an actor for. Both of these companies were formed by recruiting players from other existing companies. All adult companies operated under the sharing plan. This means that financial risks and profits were divided among those actors who had become part owners of the company by buying shares into it. So actors bought shares into their theater company, and then they were shareholders, and they had sort of a lot of responsibility over any kind of financial risk. So they made a lot of decisions. And of course, they wanted it to do well because they owned stock, basically, in the theater company. Not all actors were shareholders, and not everyone owned equal shares. So some owned many more shares than others, which of course gave them a bigger position of power. As you probably know, because you've probably studied some stuff about William Shakespeare before and his time, women did not perform for the professional companies during the English Renaissance. All of the most famous female roles, Lady Macbeth, Juliet, Cleopatra, all of those awesome female roles were played by boys, usually in their late teens. Although some older women's roles were played by grown men, especially the comic ones, like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet was usually played by a grown man. Don't worry, ladies, our time will come. But not until theater history, too.